Probably have some people wandering in. We seem to get folks kind of slowly moseying in off the street. Welcome to our Georgia Canon on Beyond Curriculum and Teachers, what kids need from school to stay in school. I'm Holly McKinney. I'm the advocacy director of Voices for Georgia's Children, and that's me. I know I'm happy you're all here, and what we're going to do is we do a quick introductory sort of lay of the land on this topic, and Jessica Pennington from the Truancy Intervention Project is going to kind of take over for a few minutes and kind of lay out some statistics about truancy prevention. And while she's doing that, and do the whole rest of this event, if you guys could write questions on the question cards that we will have staff members collect from you as this thing goes along. We'll get to ask the panelists questions after they've all done their amendments as well. So that's kind of how it works. And that's it.
Well, thanks, y'all. This is great. This is a great opportunity. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about sort of the gravity of the issue. Again, most of you probably wouldn't be in this room if you didn't know or at least were familiar with most of these statistics. But as of last June, the statistic in Georgia for high school completion is 67%. That is the third lowest in the nation. The only other two states lower than us are Nevada and New Mexico. When you look at what causes eventual dropout, it is truancy. It's chronic absenteeism. Children who don't go to school, fall behind academically, and eventually do stop going altogether. So these statistics are rather sobering. When you look at the children who miss 11 to 14 days of school, the graduation rate drops from 67 to 61. Once they get to 15, they have less than a 40% chance of finishing high school. The breakdown of that is, as you see there, if you are disabled, if you are from an economically disadvantaged family, if you are African American, if you have limited English proficiency, it gets worse. And as we know, the reason that this matters is that if kids drop out, their future earning potential plummets. High school dropouts earn on average about $20,000 a year. That's almost, I think the new number is $36,000 less than a college graduate. So it's a substantial loss. When you look at incarceration rates, it's even more sobering. Kids who are dropping out of school between the ages of 16 and 24 have a 68% higher rate of incarceration than peers of that same age. So if you're 18 and you're headed to college, you're 68% less likely to go to prison than the 18-year-old who dropped out. It's pretty startling. There is, thankfully, a movement now underway in the United States to move away from the term truancy. Truancy, and I just pulled that right off the web, is the act or condition of being absent without permission. Chronic absenteeism is different. It's when you're out of school, regardless of the reason, including suspension by the school. Once children start missing school, for whatever the reason, their academic achievement starts to wane. So there is now a movement at attendanceworks.com, you can go online and look them up, about changing a lot of the ways we are looking at absenteeism. Again, a little more of an impact. 5 days of school every year, regardless of cause, begins to affect performance and attitudes. Excused and unexcused absences have similar effects on performance, and the number of absences in elementary schools years directly influence the chance of passing state assessments. So it's vitally important. So what causes absenteeism? And I feel like I'm preaching to the converted. I'm certain as you're here, you all know the reasons. They tend to sort of fall under 4 large headings. The socioeconomic factors, lack of access to health care. We hear absolutely daily in our program, I didn't go to school, I've got asthma. Oh, here's one of our tip volunteers. We can talk to share some anecdotes. I didn't go to school because I didn't send them because I've got a fever. And there's not the family doctor to call. You can't call the nurse. Try to call the county health department and you're going to wait a little while. So a lot of our families recently learned a very startling statistic about dental care, that actually children in this state miss a lot of school because of dental-related issues. There are 16 counties in this state that do not have a dentist. Lack of affordable housing is another big issue we see. The term precariously housed is sort of the official term. We all call them couch surfers. They're those families that are not homeless in the traditional sense, but they are moving around all the time because they don't have a permanent home. Lack of child care, older students home, taking care of younger kids, and just pervasive economic disadvantage. That's what we see for nutrition, lack of good transportation, and those kinds of things. Family and parental factors, again, lack of parental education. We see a lot of our kids' parents didn't finish high school. There's not the value, it's not just not placed on finishing. There's a lack of parental supervision. Parents just may not be aware that the kids aren't going. Substance abuse, domestic violence, and all of those other things that we're all intimately familiar with. And then there are school-based factors. And I know the topic is beyond curriculum, but we have to mention that the school climate does keep a lot of kids away. There's bullying, there's overuse of harsh disciplinary procedures and policies by administrators. And again, another one we hear constantly is the kids just don't feel like they're wanted. They say, well, they don't want me here. And then there's curriculum. We hear about the kids who are not challenged, but we also see a lot of children who are unidentified special education prospects. And so they are in the wrong classes. And then the last one are just community factors. Upheaval, social change, negative peer influences, gang activity. And the big one is that loss of sort of the neighborhood school that this belongs to us. So that leads us to what do we do? And that's, I think, what everyone's going to get a chance to talk a little bit about.
After that happy presentation. So again, I'm going to nudge you guys to write your questions. You're all very content, but I want to be sure you're writing questions while we zip through these panels. Now we have, I think everybody got an agenda. Yeah, you guys all know who's here. And I'm going to let everyone, each of these panelists go through and introduce themselves and spend about 5 or so minutes talking about what their organization or agency is doing to address keeping kids in school. So rather than lather on in the wrong sequence, we're just going to start again with Jessica. You're going to talk a little bit about Truancy Intervention Project and what you guys do, and then we'll go on to Neil will give your PowerPoint going and so on. And can you guys do it?
Well, the Truancy Intervention Project is a 22-year-old program that was started in Fulton County. The idea behind it was originally a pro bono initiative that children who were coming into the juvenile justice system because of truancy needed more than punishment. And so the local bar association in Atlanta recruited a handful of lawyers who started volunteering their time working with these children who were coming into the court system because of truancy. Over the years, we always say we sort of evolved backwards. And so over the years, we started also representing children who were in the court because of educational neglect. We started seeing children as young as 7 who were being brought in on truancy charges because really out of frustration at the school. There was, this child's not coming. When he comes, he's late, he's hungry, he's not ready, and we can't get anyone's attention. So they were filing these truancy petitions out of a lack of anything else to do. So the court made a distinction that those children would be found educationally deprived by a parent. This parent falling down on the job when a 7-year-old is missing a lot of school. And so in those cases, our volunteers functioned as guardians ad litem. Most of them were still lawyers. It was still a juvenile court-based program. So in 2000, we started finally taking referrals directly from elementary schools so that we could keep children out of the juvenile justice system altogether. That's our early intervention initiative. And in those instances, schools refer directly to us for intervention. And we, in those cases, we have about a 96% success rate. Little kids want to be in school. In each one of those types of cases, the thing that we bring to the table is that trained community volunteer. And it is powerful medicine all by itself. for these children to have somebody who's just theirs, who's going to pay attention, who's going to look beneath the surface and find out what's going on, all of those factors that we talked about. Our volunteers go through a training and screening process, but the biggest thing that they bring is their own experience. Most of our volunteers, if they're not lawyers, are college graduates or more. So these are people who really value education, and they are able to not only ferret out the root issues that are involved, but bring a new perspective to our clients' lives that they're often missing. Overall, we have an 84% success rate in the aggregate over our 22 years, and we have, over the years, spread our model, and we have 6 other affiliates within the state. We have active programs in the district, in Washington, D.C., and in 2 cities in Connecticut. So I think when you look at what beyond the schools and kids need, I think it is the community.
Perfect segue. I couldn't have written that better.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Shorthouse. I want to thank a number of my colleagues for being here. I see Sandy Baxter and Richard from Baldwin County, Leah Brown, who's on our staff in Atlanta, Patty Fung from Atlanta, and Cynthia Langley and Lady Clayton. I missed somebody from Kelton. Also, I appreciate Steve Ellinger being here because Steve's on the board of this organization, Voices, and also is president of Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, and he thinks all day. He's one of the smartest guys in Georgia on creating school success, working on policy to develop better ways for our schools to be successful. So it's a little overwhelming to have somebody as smart as Steve. He's a great guy, and if you know him, you know him right. And then also to his left is Gail Hume, who runs the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement, which has a deep, abiding feel for everything that people in this room do, because she knows that the leadership development in schools is only a part. It's a huge part, and we need to do a ton more of it. We're so thankful for what she's done. In fact, Steve helped found that organization. But they depend ultimately, as all schools do, on the community for being better. So thank you, you two guys, for being here. Community development, or communities in schools, takes a community development approach to school improvement by unifying the full resources of the community around children, their parents and families, teachers and schools, because that's what's needed. It's in this topic, as I said to Polly, this is, to me, I think it's the topic for school improvement, especially for the economically lower 1/3, maybe even possibly 1/2 of the children in Georgia. Just a quick statistic, there's 1,705,000 kids in the schools in Georgia, about 2,200 schools. Over about 55% of them are on the free and reduced price lunch program, which means that we have nearly half the children in some state of poverty. And its associated ills are what really hurt schools.
Neil, I'm going to make sure to take picture. Can you guys hear him in the back? Right, I'm not sure how.
Thank you, Polly, for asking.
And then also, if I didn't know if you heard the rule, the clicker's not working for the PowerPoint. So when you're ready to do the PowerPoint, just
All right, I didn't have one. Okay, those little things on the screen there are the kinds of things that you and I and everybody who's really working on making schools better deal with. These are the, as we call them, the non-cognitive stressors that make school impossible for some kids and make it really hard on teachers. Those kinds of things, and Jessica talked about them in some detail. When that's there, school does not work. It's not a matter of having a great curriculum or highly qualified teachers when people aren't there, and they really can't be there, not only physically or aren't there physically in a lot of cases. Over 180,000 of the 1.7 million, more than 10% of the kids in Georgia miss 15 days or more of school. When you think of your own families and yourself, 15 days you have to have, cancer. You never miss days. Your children don't miss days. Anyway, those are the non-cognitive stressors that we say. If you can flip to the next one. And for some reason, we're cutting off half this stuff at the top. But anyway, what this does is weigh down, so the teachers aren't really in a position to compete with these other stressors. The teachers on the left, the instructional programs are great. What's going on the right is killing them. In one prominent school district in Georgia, we have 9 high schools. 2 of those high schools have 100% graduation rates. 5 of the other 7 are in the low 50s and some in the 40s. Which means that teachers can be successful. If they can be successful and have 100% graduation rate in 2 of our schools, then what is preventing those teachers from being successful everywhere? We don't think it's the teachers. Yeah, there's some of that, but we think it's the external factors which you are dealing with. Okay, for the next one. What this is, academically and social vulnerable students succeed when schools and communities work together. Carolyn Aikman and I were just talking about school-based health care, how it cuts down absenteeism. It's dealing with children where they are. We need all those things down here on the right are the things that need to happen to support schools. Those aren't things that communities and schools does. All we do is, we're an aggregator, we're a router, we're a facilitator of that. That you've got to have mentoring and parents and all those other things in health, like Carolyn does with through Emory. Different kinds of behavior. Mental health is an enormous problem, and teachers aren't equipped to deal with it. How can we expect them to be good at math and also be mental health practitioners? It's crazy. But we've got great mental health practitioners. We've got to get them into the school. So when all that happens, if we take those children who are in the dropout pipeline and we align the community resource-based resources on the left side of that Venn diagram, and then link it up to great instructional programs, which our schools in so many cases have, then those kids in the middle are going to be successful. But it takes a community development approach to do this. Schools cannot succeed apart from communities. Communities can't succeed apart from great schools. So it's, and to the extent that we compartmentalize and say, okay, schools can do it on their own, all we need is great teachers, it's not true. Do we want great teachers? Have to have them. Can't do it without them. But we can't, but it's not, it's one of those necessary but insufficient issues. So community schools is about that community development process so that the Boys and Girls Clubs, wouldn't it be great if every kid in Georgia was in junior achievement? Or wouldn't it be great if every girl was in the Scouts? That's what we've got to do. We've got to build more of those. We've got to have more truancy intervention projects. Those are the things that can help us to get at the children where they are and enable them to be successful. Anyway, that's our story and we're sticking to it.
Thank you, Neil. And thanks to Neil and Jessica for their great work the last several years. Our executive director, Sharon Hill, was actually involved with Jessica in the establishment of the initial TIP organization. I'm Rob Rhodes. I'm Director of Projects for Georgia Appleseed. We're a legal services organization that we believe is unique in the state in that we are unlike Atlanta Legal Aid, which does great work, and Florida Legal Services Program, which does great work. Individuals, we don't take on individual representation. Our goal is to identify systemic policy issues that adversely affect disadvantaged folks who can't fend for themselves, and to take the volunteer services of lawyers from throughout Georgia and use them to assess and investigate the circumstances to determine if there need to be policy or law changes that would make a change, a systemic change for the better and advance the life outcomes for folks. We've done a lot of work in the last 2 or 3 years on student discipline in Georgia's public schools, and that's pretty much why I'm here. I have a PowerPoint presentation that goes 45 minutes or so, and so this is going to be a real quick run through. I will say, though, that if your organization is invested in this area and interested in our findings, which I'll share briefly with you, I have PowerPoint, will travel, so just contact me and I'm glad to come. I've given now over 50 presentations on this issue to well over 2,000 people throughout the state of Georgia. And what we have done is because we are an organization that prides itself on being objective and basing our conclusions on fact and law, and investigative efforts. We went to the OE and we got great cooperation. We received all the student discipline data for the state of Georgia for the past now going on 10 years. We have our task in for the 10-year worth of data. And through another professional pro bono volunteer group, a major accounting firm with an office here in Atlanta, they've helped us to create a very powerful database for the individual student discipline history of each individual student in Georgia for the last 9 and going on 10 years. So that's 1.6 million, 1.7 million kids in each year. We don't know who they are. We can track as on an individual basis their student discipline history, and that gives us a very powerful tool. And we used that. We also, as part of our study, went out and talked to educators around the state, from South Georgia to the North Georgia mountains, and from Columbus to Savannah, and sat down with them and talked about what's going on in the school district. We talked to superintendents, principals, teachers, school resource officers, prosecuting attorneys who deal with truancy cases or deal with delinquency cases coming out of the schools to find out what was going on in Georgia. We published a Solomon report in 2011, which is available on our website. We call that Voices from the Field. I'll share with you some data. I would say to you that our mantra is to investigate, disseminate, and advocate. And so we spent a long time investigating. We've got a good handle on the facts. We've also done a lot of, we're not educators or lawyers, but we, play an educator on television now if I had to. So we know a lot about the theory behind effective student discipline and effective codes of conduct. And so we've done a lot of work, and we have disseminated. I mean, we issued this report. It's been reviewed by thousands of people throughout the state of Georgia. I've made a lot of these presentations. We are now in the advocacy mode. And most of you don't know me. Some of you have met me, and I think perceive me to be sort of a dispassionate, quiet sort of guy. And that's true in general terms until I develop an issue where I feel a strong passion about, at which point I become a wild man. And I have reached that point in connection with public education in Georgia and the effect of our public education disciplinary practices, policies, and outcomes. With respect, the performance of the public education system is not one that we can be proud of in terms of overall outcomes in Georgia. The graduation rates, as reported, are unacceptable. And the average graduation rate in Georgia masks graduation rates in some of the school districts that are simply incredible. We have school districts in Metro Atlanta and elsewhere that are barely graduating 50% of the students in 4 years. We have high schools where less than 50% of the kids are graduating in 4 years. We think there's a strong correlation with the use of exclusionary discipline. The data demonstrate that. Those districts throughout Georgia that have the lowest graduation rates typically have the highest out-of-school suspension rates in the state. And you know where they are. They're largely in the urban centers in Albany, and Macon, and Savannah, and Augusta, and here in Atlanta, and elsewhere. But nevertheless, there's a strong correlation. I'm certainly aware that this is a what social scientists would call a multivariable problem. There's a lot of causes that go into this. But one of the challenges of recognizing this sort of multi-causation factor is paralysis. You get to the point where you say, how can we deal with all these things that are causing all these problems? We have chosen to believe and to espouse that you got to grab the dog somewhere. You're trying to get him a bath, you got to grab that dog somewhere. We want to grab the dog in the area of student discipline and behavior management. We believe that if we address this issue effectively, we will carry along a lot of other issues that are affecting student outcomes, student performance. And so our role is, at this point in time in this area, to present these data around the country, to influence and to inform key community groups, local community groups, parents. However, we do work with educators, and I always say this at this point in my presentation, I know I sound kind of negative. We recognize the very difficult job that the teachers, the principals, and the superintendents PowerPoint, you'll see a copy or a picture of the great Belinda walking across a tightrope, and then a picture of the scales of justice. On the one hand, the teacher and the principal has to balance the collective right of every student collectively to have a safe environment, to have environments conducive to learning. So we think that's on one side of the balance scale. On the other, we think that each individual student in Georgia has a right to at least a reasonable chance to get a quality high school education. Even those students who will act out, which will be a large percentage of those, especially in middle school, because we have middle school kids, they're going to be acting out. So how do you balance those two things? We think there are ways that you can do it. And Ginny is at the end of the line here, and I'm sort of maybe setting the stage a little bit for her, because we're proud to be involved in a process that's beginning to be implemented at the Department of Education that will focus on, we hope, a culture shift, a major game-changing culture shift in this state that will introduce a more positive approach to student behavior, to student discipline, that will keep kids in class, keep them graduating, reduce the entry into the school to prison pipeline, and deal with some of the reprehensible and almost inconceivable behaviors that we're seeing out in our state and around the country today. So, as I say, I'm sort of known in these sort of presentations to be the quiet guy who sort of presents the facts dispassionately, but I have gone beyond that point. I've become very passionate about this at a point, 60 years after the Round Board of Education, and 50 years after the I Have a Dream speech as of today, we still have not realized the absolute requirement of my judgment that each child in the state should get an opportunity to get a good quality high school education. We need to get there. So what our commitment is to work with all the community stakeholders in this process to be a voice that brings the facts to the table, but also brings the passion that says we can solve this, we must solve this, and we must do it now. We cannot afford to wait any longer.
You can't get really passionate too, so you got to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Berry. I'm with the Division of Family and Children Services. I'm the program manager for the Educational Programming Assessment and Consultation Unit, also known as EPAC. And together over the last 3 years, EPAC started in 2010 with a new focus or a new emphasis. Traditionally, when we talk about children in foster care, we've looked at it from three particular categories: safety, permanency, and well-being. In the past, DFACS has always worked on making sure the children were safe, making sure they were had a permanent residence, and also well-being. But within the well-being paradigm, we never really looked at the educational outcomes until 3 years ago. It became a new focus for the Division of Family and Children Services, so the EPAC unit was brought into fruition. And for the course of that, we want to understand that not only does Georgia have an issue with the academic outcomes for children across the state, but when we look at a subgroup or a subset population of children in foster care, the numbers tend to even exaggerate a little bit more. There are over 8,000 children in care within the state of Georgia, and of those 8,000 children, 5,000 are school age. And when we look at those 5,000 school-age children, the typical or the average number of placement changes or disruptions for children in care can be anywhere from 8 to 17 throughout their time of their tenure in foster care. And at first glance, we don't think too much about that 8 to 17 number, but when we think about 8 to 17 placement changes, that's also 8 to 17 different schools. That's also 8 to 17 different subsets of friends and social peer groups and things of that nature. So there's a lot of fluctuation, there's a lot of instability, there are a lot of trauma that's associated with children in care that traditionally your normal student would not have to endure. So it's intensified. When we talk about the needs of children in care, it's truly intensified to a greater level than children who may not have languished in care. So we have other problems where because of these placements and disruption changes, they tend to get behind in school. When I've been to 3 schools in one school year, this school may be on credits, the other one's on semester, one is on quarter hours, and things don't always translate. The curriculum is not the same. This teacher is at this phase of the scope and sequence, while another is at another progression. So there are so many different problems, so many different sub-tiers that we can go into when we talk about the problems with children in care and education, that the EPAC unit really found this niche in ensuring that the educational needs for children were met. One of the major focuses of our group over the past 2 years has been educational stability, not just for youth in care, but also for homeless and unaccompanied youth under Fostering Connections, as well as the McKinney-Vento Act. One of the things that we thought that it would be key for us to ensure the success of children in care was to make sure that they could remain in their school of origin as long as possible. One of the greatest barriers was transportation being a key obstacle in making sure children in care could stay in their school of origin. So we were able to identify funds and services to ensure that for the first day, we want to keep them where they are. We want to limit the disruptions, limit the instability, limit the moves, limit the placement changes. Then after that, we also provide services as far as tutorial services for children who may have lapses and gaps in their academic progress. We recruit and hire 230 teachers statewide throughout Georgia to provide intensive one-on-one support for those 5,000 school-aged children in care. In addition to that, we provide education support monitors throughout the state who advocate on behalf of children, not just the ones who are suffering, not just the ones who are behind, but we also advocate for those who may need to be in the gifted program, because a lot of times what you'll find out with children in care is they don't have a voice. They don't have anyone who can fight for their rights, who can advocate on their behalf. So that's one of the other key components of our program. And then thirdly, we also have resource development. We link and mine resources within the community to bring our children into services by the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, Century 21 Learning Centers, after-school care programs, tutoring within the community that may go beyond what they can reach during the normal school day hours. So when we talk about children in care, we really want to look at it as a new paradigm shift, because like I said, it has been ignored for a long period of time. The graduation rates for Georgia grads is third lowest in the country, but when we look at foster kids, it drops even worse, and that we are last in the country, and it's been that way for a long period of time, that foster children have been an ignored population for far too long, and that's pretty much the purpose for our existence, and that's pretty much all I have.
Ginny, I'm going to take a minute and remind you guys, if you have questions that you've written down, hold up your cards, and you'll come around and grab them so we can hit the next section. Go ahead, Ginny.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Ginny O'Connell. I'm with the Department of Education. And I'm going to try to be as concise as I can in a short period of time to give you the information about positive behavioral interventions and supports. And when I'm speaking to non-educators, which I get the opportunity to do often, and I love it, and I thank and appreciate the offer and the invitation to come today. We've heard a lot about what's wrong in the schools, and boy, we have a lot of work to do to take care of our kids. But I'm also really proud to be part of something that is proactive, that is in place through the Department of Education and in schools across Georgia. Not enough by far. But maybe just briefly to tell you what it is from a non-educator perspective is for you to think of an aquarium full of fish and all the beautiful things that we have in aquariums, many of us in our homes, in doctors' offices, and to think of that aquarium as the school. And when you have fish getting sick in the aquariums, what we typically do is, and any good aquarium owner will take out those ailing fish, we'll put them into another little bowl of water, nurse them back to health, get them all healthy again for whatever reasons they were sick, and then put them back in the aquarium. The problem is if the water in the aquarium is polluted, has algae, has dangerous components to that, what is going to happen to the fish when we put them back in that aquarium? They get sick again. And it is our most vulnerable fish are the first to be affected. The tough kids, those tough fish with a whole lot of supports behind them can last a lot longer in these areas. What we have done, I believe in education and certainly in Georgia, is try real hard to nurse back to health those fish that get sick. But if we aren't tending to the root of the problem and perhaps the school environment, we are just putting kids back in. What positive behavior interventions and supports, which is a research-based framework, it was funded through the U.S. Department of Ed back in the 90s. And it really was in response to school systems across the country saying, help us. We have kids with these behavior issues who have maybe even been identified as having behavioral disorders, and we need help. So the U.S. Department of Ed put out a call to colleges and universities in the country and said, we've got some grant money here. We want some folks out there to do some research. Help us figure out how we can help schools. What came out of that was this framework. It is not a curriculum. It's not something you buy. It's not a fly-by-night. What they did was pull together the research of what we know about behavior and develop the framework. So that's all the good maintenance in the aquarium. What we want to make sure is our schools are healthy and that we aren't losing kids to issues of suspending them because they skipped school and issues that are outside the school setting, and reserve our, eliminate those kids that may be bogging down the time in the system unnecessarily, and reserve school administrators and teachers time for those kids who need the extra support. PBIS is the framework. It's a 3-day school-based training, so we couldn't even begin to get into all of it here, but the idea is it's preventative and it's proactive. And it sets us a framework where the schools are looking at all of their data, their teaching expectations, they're acknowledging expectations, they're building relationships with students, holding staff and students accountable for behavior and establishing respectful environments, acknowledging those, focusing on positive preventative strategies, and making sure things are right in the building before we start assuming the problem is with the child. And that's really what the strong exclusionary disciplinary practices are based on, the assumption there's something wrong with these kids. You're going to stay up, go home and figure out how to behave and come back in a week, and you better have learned it on your own. We know that we wouldn't do that with a child struggling in reading. We wouldn't do that with a child struggling in math. We wouldn't send them home for a week and say, figure out how to do it and come back when you've learned how to read. PBIS is a framework, it's a philosophy, it's a way of doing business, it's a commitment at the school level that we are going to look at all factors and make sure our house is in order so that we can focus on the students who need deeper levels of support. That's what PBIS is very briefly. I did bring for you, and just to let you know, we started in 2008, and actually prior to 2008, there were some schools in Georgia that received some training through a federal grant. And unfortunately, with grants, when the funding is ended, so does all of the support. So in 2008, had the really great opportunity to revive that at the department level. So this is all funded and housed in the Department of Ed. We're not grant funded. We have a team, I have a team of folks who will train school staffs after much preparation, because there's a lot of, this isn't about getting training and a magic fix. It really is about preparing a school staff for a culture shift, a philosophy change. And we began in 2008. At this point, we have trained about 400 schools. I think we're just over 400. The map I gave you are the areas where training has occurred. I will tell you quite honestly, because training has occurred there and technical assistance has been offered and provided, does not mean all of those districts still have schools implementing. It's hard work. It's a commitment ahead of time that we are going to stop doing business the way we have been doing and we're going to change. The really wonderful thing about it is we are at a point right now, and this is what's so great to be able to talk to those of you here. And as Rob mentioned earlier, we were able to pull together a statewide summit in August. And we pulled together representatives from college and universities, state agencies, advocacy groups, just many, many organizations and learned people to come together with us and figure out how can we get this going in every school. We won't accept the way things are. We won't accept these low grades. We won't accept pushing kids out of school. We have now a commitment and are working on a statewide implementation plan
looking at potential policy changes to help schools with funding. This takes coordination at the district level. It doesn't cost money. We actually train for no cost. We come when people want us to come, but we don't go impose either. But looking at possible funding sources to help districts support the work that it takes, because it is coordination at the district level, to increase the staff we have to be able to provide the support. The training is 3 days, the support is 3 to 5 years, because it's systems level change. But we are so pleased that we have garnered such immense support. On the PowerPoint handout, I just copied some of the slides that I thought were data that you may appreciate, because we do have results. We have been working for 5 years in these schools, and we are seeing tremendous changes in exclusionary practices. We are keeping more kids in class, in school, and I stress in class because there are a lot of creative practices where it may not be called suspension, but there are students who are not spending all of their day in the classroom available for instruction. And we have reduced that, and those numbers continue to grow. I've included some of that. Obviously, our biggest challenge is high school, and that's an area that is biggest need, but they're very large. But we are really hoping with an implementation plan that we will get some supports, grow this. We want this framework in all settings for children, in after-school programs, in foster care settings, in preschool young children's settings, where we're teaching behavior and acknowledging behavior and addressing what needs to be addressed to prevent kids from needing some of the services we've heard about today.
Wow, and you know what? You guys have done a great job, but despite your excellent job, we have many questions. So, just goes to show how the audience can follow directions. It's very impressive. See, I hardly know where to start. And usually, for those of you who have not been to one of these CAN meetings before, the Children Advocacy Network meetings, what I do is I'll ask you to identify yourselves just so that eye contact can be made with everybody, and so that if your question is not answered in a way that works for you, have a chance to have one follow-up question. So our first contestant is Mrs. Molly Casey. Hi, Molly. Molly has a question. She's with Teen Parent Connection, and she says, with only 40% of teen mothers graduating from high school, what interventions have been identified and or implemented to address the needs of this population? Who wants to take that? Then I'll jump at once. Neil, you might have an answer.
I think it's fairly general. I mean, any of these, that is maybe one of the highest producers of ladies dropping out of school. But I've also heard that as many fathers of these children who are these teenage fathers are dropping out at the same rate as the mothers are. So this is not just a girl issue. Am I correct? I mean, you know that
You are. Girls have parents. So
I'm not
you need to a little more.
I'm not downplaying the importance of all that goes along with that, but so I think somehow we talk only about the girls and somehow miss the boys as a part of this. Ultimately, all of this, the way to deal with all of this, I think, is getting into some kind of creative and dynamic relationship with the children. And it's through big brothers and big sisters or mentors of any type, through some of the other organizations. We've got to develop a relationship with these kids. Kids respond to people, not to programs. And it's a person that carries hope and change for a child when they develop that relationship. We were just talking the other day, somebody said every child is one caring adult away from being a complete success. Every child is one caring adult away from being a complete success. And I think what our children need, these children, are going to need a heavy dose of that support, not only from their mothers, but from other people in the community. There's no short answer, and there's no easy way to that. It's going to take relationships, and it'll take a lot of it, and people skilled in the carrying out of that kind of relationship.
Do you follow up?
Well, I think what I'm looking for, I work with pregnant parent communities who talk to me. And unfortunately, when our girls are displaced, which is pretty frequently, they move great distances because there are very good places for them. So the opportunity to stay in the same school is very limited. But really one of the key problems is not when coaches work directly with them and they have providers working with them, but one of the key problems is that there is not childcare available for them while they're in school. And, you know, aligning them with other community resources is wonderful, but there are very few schools that offer that. There are some, but that's really one of the key issues. That and the fact that if they give birth during the school year, they miss math lessons at school, and then there are not interventions in place to really help them catch up. So I'm always looking for kind of creative solutions or places that we can direct our focus.
I apologize when you, the questions first and asked, I didn't know it was for foster children, girls in care.
Well, we refer other girls too, but that's my particular target.
Right. So now when we talk about the subset of the ladies in care who have a child while in care, we have continuing service. I'm sure that you're familiar with some of them. However, of course, resources are not always unlimited. We have the PrEP program, which is a part of the unit that I'm affiliated with. I'm not sure if you're familiar with PrEP. And in addition to PrEP, we also have the independent living program to offer assistance to the mothers as far as daycare and other things of that nature if they're above the age of 14. So while they're in care, that they can have daycare. And then we also have placement settings for parenting mothers, as you probably are familiar with some of those placement settings as well, to try to assist them in securing their high school diploma while they are, caring mothers. So there is, like I said, there is a continuum of services. However, we don't always have the resources everywhere they're needed. They're few and far between. They're probably not in every county where the problems may exist. But again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. When we don't have the resources in a certain area, we have to put the girls where the resources are. So then you have another disruption. You have another placement change, and that's where we stand. But we'll continue, like I said, we'll continue to add resources in that area. We'll continue to build programs to assist in those, in those areas to make sure that that's not a forgotten population. However, like you said, again, we're waiting on somebody to write us a really big check so we can address that situation.
I think that's my story for almost everything.
Paul, on that point though, there isn't a big check. It isn't coming. It's not going to happen. It's going to take people mobilizing and taking responsibility and not waiting for the government to do this. It can't happen in that way. It's got to be our churches and houses of worship, mosques, our synagogues, people who are supposed to, like me, going to this church and supposed to be a caring person. It's going to take a mobilization of those people. Granted, we need the public policy and the changes and the support to do that. But it's ultimately, in the meantime, it's going to take community development at the very core level where we massively unify resources around our schools and around these children. We know who they are. It's not a secret. We know where they are. If we don't know where they are, we simply ask the schools because they got fantastic records on all these kids. It's going to take people, instead of playing alien awful and saying, gosh, the government's terrible, what about me? How terrible am I? If I'm aware of a problem and not doing something about it.
Your follow-up, please. You would ask a question.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I agree with that 100%.
But
when are these organizations, when is DFACS, when are these organizations going to put together a program that can be taken to the churches, to the interfaith communities, so that it's not kind of willy-nilly, but you can formalize? Because I agree, there's nobody sitting around with a big, there's some people, but at a grassroots level, if you could get the information out there to us, and by the way, have some documentation on the effectiveness of the programs you're trying to get money for, people will support it. When's that coming? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I mean, it's a great thing, but also the church communities need some help in getting that information to them, so that they can, pastors and what have you, can begin to disseminate that to
The trouble is, our churches aren't thinking about this to the extent that they need to be.
I'm here.
You're an exception. There are not enough pastors and leaders like you who are, the information is public information. I mean, it's not like it's a big secret that we don't know where these issues are, where the resources are in a lot of cases. Man, we need to do more dissemination. But the ball is in a lot of the public and the private sector court, so to speak, to go ferret out what is available. I mean, how long, if it's my own child, I'm going to find the answer. What about other people's children? How committed we are to those? So, I mean, we're all in this together.
All right, moving on to the next one. Colin, is it Duvet? Hello, Colin. With the Auburn Avenue Research Library. His question is, what role can libraries and after-school programs play, and how do we advocate for them?
Well, I can say already they're playing a huge role. The public library, the Fulton County Public Library System has some outstanding programs. I'm sure you're aware of a lot of them. We certainly rely on them. There's some excellent GED programs and some, after-school programs. I mean, they are a phenomenal and underutilized resource. So, for our part, and I failed earlier to introduce Karen Cloud is with us today. Karen, if you'll stand up, raise high, come back and see. Karen is our staff attorney, and her name is the public librarian. And we are constantly referring volunteers to the libraries because they are phenomenal resources here in the metropolitan Atlanta community. So, I mean, I don't know what else can be done. I think y'all are doing an awful lot. The Atlanta Fulton folks are. Karen, did you want to add anything before I just waited here?
Well, the juvenile court has actually, on several occasions, formalized book drives and, drives to get kids and families to come in and get library cards and utilize all the systems, the online system for homework systems and tutoring. And so we have been working with the library to continuously push the services the library offers out to our clients, at least the Fulton County Juvenile Court. And so I think it's a matter of, but we reached out to the library and we found, the folks that we met were very receptive. So I think it's just a matter of, different organizations making the contact, because the library is very receptive and they want more people to utilize their services because there's such a wealth of information and resources that you guys offer. And especially for the research library, I'll talk to you after this. But I do think it's just a matter of people reaching out and taking advantage of the services and getting it out to the families because they're not aware. They go to the library and do homework or get on the computer and go, get on Facebook. But in terms of the actual online resources, a lot of families and children don't even know that they exist.
Comment that would, I think, responsive to the last two questions. First, we've been approached by the Atlanta Public School System to be part of the process to address some very difficult challenges they have with regard to student discipline. They have one of the highest incidence rate of out-school suspension and the lowest graduation rate of any district in the state, so there are surely issues there. And they certainly, the administration there, Mr. Davis and others are very much aware of it. So one of the things that they talked to us about doing is trying to engage in several identified school clusters, the local community, with a particular emphasis on the faith community, and to sort of go out to the faith community in those school cluster areas and present the data, and then encourage involvement by the faith community in terms of after-school opportunities and tutoring and mentoring and things like that. So that's hopefully in the works. To supplement that, we have a project that's about 80% complete, I would say, which is called Innovative Interventions, which is a law firm, Troutman Sanders is our partner, and they've done an enormous amount of research to identify the different kinds of after-school and other third-party intervention programs around the country that have worked to help deal with student achievement and truancy and those sorts of things. And we're going to put those together as part of a parent toolkit that's going to go on our website that will allow people to go on and learn in general about those, and then to click the links to learn more details about those particular programs. So at least provide a resource that would allow parents and other community groups to then say, okay, maybe this will work in our community, and so at least provide that level of information.
I have a question here that is a little bit, I'll talk this with Representative Stovall, I'm going to say hi. And she, what district are you?
74 in Clayton County.
Clayton County. So her question has more to do with the teachers, and I guess in choosing this topic for beyond teachers and curriculum, what kids need from schools to stay in schools, I guess you can't totally, the reason I chose the topic is because I think that it is a group effort, right? It takes all the pieces of the pie. So I'm going to ask this question because this is a piece of the pie that is the teachers, and I think it's important to kind of love to hear your guys' take on this. What are your thoughts on moving the best teachers to teach at low-performing schools? In what ways could this be positive or bring about challenges? So it's, because we're at this point looking at the other stuff around schools, does moving a teacher affect the other pieces, right?
I can just make some observations. I mean, we did a study as part of a national effort with our Appleseed and sister centers around the country that was an attempt to assess resource allocation in intra-district. In other words, to take a look at the way a quote-unquote poor, less affluent school district and school cluster in a particular district compared to the more affluent cluster in the same district in terms of the resources that we put into them. And I won't name the district, but one thing we did find there was no real egregious difference in this particular local metro county district, except that it was clear that in the more affluent school district, the experience level of teachers was much, much higher than in the less affluent school district. Now, there's not necessarily an absolute correlation with excellence and experience, but you think that as a general one. So we saw there that for various reasons, and again, it's the I think tenured school teachers have some power over where they go to work, and I think it's very difficult to force a tenured, longer-term experienced teacher to teach any place other than where he or she wants to teach. So I think that it's probably would only be implemented through an incentive-based program where it was made worth the while of the person to teach in the more challenging school district, or the ones that need the most help. I do think, to some extent, that and I'm kind of a one-note PBIS pony today in support of Ginny's program, but I do think to the extent that we implement training and changes in school climate, that we will have an indirect effect of making schools and school climate and morale more attractive. We'll keep more teachers in place more often, and it will be less of a likelihood that a teacher would rather teach at Dunwoody rather than in Tower. Just for those of you who know DeKalb County, that's kind of the reality of life today. So I'm rambling here a little bit, but I think there are sort of systemic challenges that will be very difficult to overcome, the sort of force issues that have to deal with incentives, and then an overall climate change that will simply be able to reduce that to some extent.
I think part of the climate change is support, and we've done studies nationally with teachers in schools where communities and schools exist. We've done them locally in Georgia, and we've even done Atlanta with our Teach for America's teachers, who are high-energy, go-getting type teachers. They are all enthusiastically receptive to a coordinated support system that comes with outside agencies. If it's coordinated, they don't need the raining down of random acts of goodness on top of them where they don't know what they're doing, and everybody's covered up with opportunity. Can't deal with it. but where that is coordinated and aligned to curriculum, or aligned to school annual ops plans, that's what they're looking for. So the teachers are very enthusiastic about that kind of support. Oh, Ginny?
Ginny, and then
And the only response I want to add to these otherwise great comments is that if we put too much emphasis on the teacher's skill and experience, we're missing a little bit of the boat. It's a systems level, school climate issue that has to do with expectations for all students regardless. I mean, I can tell you I've been in schools with brand new first year teachers who are the most engaging. They are the teachers that are the most enthusiastic, building relationships with students, and I've been in classrooms with very seasoned, very highly qualified teachers who couldn't tell you anything about some of their students other than their names and their grades. So while it's very important, and I think the question is a great one, we would be remiss if we focus on the qualifications of the teacher and not at the system, how it operates at the building level, and even more importantly at the district level. But those disparities are frequently what we will look at is what is the culture in that school, what are the expectations for both staff and students. So it's more than just teacher qualification, although it's important.
That probably kind of stole my answer, but I think it's a fabulous question, and I think it's a discussion that needs to take place. I'm a big fan of PBIS. We've seen it working. It's a great program. But I think that what your question leads to is the greater question, which is until we make education and all of the supports that go around it about kids and not about adults, I think we're going to keep having problems. And I think it's a great question. It's a discussion starter. There's no quick answer. There's no quick fix. But, you know, oftentimes even in a school, even in a Dunwoody, a great school, you know, you've got the best history teacher and all he wants to teach is, you know, senior college prep. Well, maybe the ninth graders need that teacher more and they will move them. You know, it's like, well, we can't move him, you know, and those are decisions made on the basis of what the adult wants and needs and not on the student. And I think that until we start having more of those discussions, even on small scale, I think we're going to keep having, you know, some problems that we could overcome a little more easily if we could shift the attention and the importance, I think, more to students sometimes. So it's a fabulous question. That's a great discussion starter.
do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
That was a really broad question that hit everybody. It was awesome, almost everybody. This one is from Sharina. Help me out. I feel. With Kids in Discovery of Self. And it says, understanding and respecting the programs presently in place, I see a large number of youth still falling through cracks. How can we expand this, meaning these programs, for the masses? One child neglected is a problem. How can we reach ones who are troubled? Do you think inspiring a child to learn is necessary? So we kind of get to the millennium.
One thing we haven't talked about, and I mean it's related. One thing that's consistent: all these kids have parents, and we too often in the human service community are either anti-parent, we're mad at the parents because these kids are bad, so we're blaming them, and what is almost as bad is that we think somehow we can be successful without them on our side. And so I think that in terms of the masses, we've got to be, this gets back to the role of our religious communities too. We've got to somehow pay greater respect and have more support for parents because they're there with every one of these children. And I think that too often we have not figured out a way to spend the time. Frequently parents are scared of teachers. They feel like they're dumb and the teachers are smart, and they aren't really enrolled into, the parents are not enrolled into the instructional process, especially the kind of kids that are having these behavior issues. the parents are further driven from the equation to be part of the support. So the systemic, the ultimate system is the family. And it's under great duress, and we all know that. We have to all be thinking in our minds, as well as all this program-related stuff, how do the parents fit into this, and how do we involve them and have them be a part of it? It's not an easy thing. We somehow feel like we can just do a better job. We just work around the parents. They're with these kids all the time. And even parents who are beating kids, who are abusing kids, have the children's respect ultimately. It's a very strange thing. Those who are in this business know about that. So we've got to work and do more with them. I think that's part of the systemic answer.